We're going to bring a message back.
Yeah, unless you don't Dr. Ross.
See, you're all being
And about sexuality. And they might see something like that gathering.
And then what in another, like in the inner city, there's a difference.
The only thing these two 11-year-olds
Once they have... Thank you, Pastor.
It was a struggle.
I'm really close because really, though they are
Yes, Bishop.
people don't realize just how much.
You're in college.
Across Christian, Islamic, and the Jewish communities recognizing one God. All the hands raised. All right.
We're taking a message, speaking truth, but you have.
Absolutely. Great job. Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, Imam.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It is an honor. I was just joking about leaving San Diego. I mean, it's a great place, but I am really glad to be here. As you can see, the Ruth Institute, the motto of the Ruth Institute is one man, one woman for life. A lot of times we're best known for the one man, one woman part. That's what everybody wants to talk about. But I want you to know I'm equally committed to the for life part, and I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about that. Now, my topic is what I call the systematic... Dr. Ross asked me to talk about systemic abuse of children. I call it structural injustices to children. This is the thing that this is my characterization of what we're dealing with. But before we begin, I want to just briefly say what I mean by marriage. The foundation of unity must be truth. So it's important that we all know what we're talking about. So I'm just going to put my cards on the table. This is what I mean when I use the term, and you can align yourself with me or not, you know, as you see fit. Just for the record, I am a Roman Catholic. I don't speak for the Catholic Church, but it is my intention always to be faithful to the Catholic Church. And so it's my desire to be teaching and speaking in unity with the Church. And so this definition here, this understanding, comes straight out of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And it says, the matrimonial covenant by which a man and woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life is by its nature ordered toward the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. This covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. So you see here, there's a natural element to the thing. The way in which it's naturally ordered is part of the understanding, but there's also a supernatural understanding as well. And so this is the perspective that I'm coming from. I just want everyone to understand that that's where I'm coming from. So I think it's also important that we say that the family is a social institution that is built on love, that has as its foundation love. That's what it's all about. And a lot of times, particularly as an academic, I hear people talking about marriage in ways that make it sound almost like marriage is some kind of political category, or marriage is some kind of economic thing, okay? And while it might have something like that, it's not just a special case of the economy. It's not just a special case of the political system. A lot of what students hear about on college campuses is really a political version of marriage. When they're all talking about equality all the time, equality is a kind of political concept. And there's a place for some sort of equality, but that's not the primary thing that it's all about. The primary thing that it's all about is really love. And I think we have to keep that in mind, or we're going to miss the whole thing. We're going to miss what it's about. And I think a lot of the distortions that we're seeing in married life have to do with those things. Why is this thing going on by itself? What the heck? Is there an elf in here? What is going on? Okay. So if this thing flashes, I'm going to keep my hands up here, and if the thing flashes, you know it's not me, okay? So, and you warn me, because I'm talking to you and I'm not looking at the screen. Okay, so again, to carry on with what do I mean by marriage, if you were to go to a Catholic marriage preparation course, what I'm about to say is a sort of thing you might hear, okay? And you won't hear it everywhere. This isn't in the Catechism, but it's the kind of thing that you might hear. We talk about the 4 F's of marriage, and we talk to engaged couples about these 4 F's. That marriage must be free, full, faithful, and fruitful, okay? So when we say it's free, we mean that your consent must be freely given. This is a very important aspect of marriage. If your consent is not freely given, it's not a valid marriage. Okay, and that's been part of Catholic canon law for a long time, right? And that's grounds for annulling a marriage, actually, right? If you can show your consent wasn't freely given or your understanding was distorted or anything like that, that's grounds for annulment. It was not a valid marriage if you were coerced into it or something like that. So it must be freely entered into. Why? Because it's a covenant of love. And love that is not free is not love, right? You can't coerce that. So it's very important, that first F. Second, it must be full. That means no holding back. It's a sharing of the whole of life, the full of life, okay? You're not going in to say, okay, this is an economic partnership, but I'm holding back on the other stuff. Or, okay, this is a sexual relationship, but I'm holding back on the other stuff. That doesn't work. It needs to be full, a full sharing of the whole of life. It needs to be faithful, meaning sexual exclusivity inside of marriage. And not just sexual exclusivity, but also emotional exclusivity, personal exclusivity. You don't badmouth your spouse in public, for example. Okay, that's a kind of unfaithfulness. It's not sexual in nature, but it's a harm to marriage. It's a wrong against marriage to be behaving like that. And then finally, we teach that marriage is fruitful. That marriage is meant to be fruitful. We don't know exactly what the fruits will be, but that procreation is an obvious and likely fruit of most marriages, and that one needs to be respectful and open towards the fruitfulness of married life, and that these are all important elements of marriage, and that, in a sense, we saw it in one of the previous presenters, that the point of marriage is to be fruitful and multiply. That's part of what's going on. And so these are the 4 F's that one might see in preparation for marriage. What do I mean when I say a structural injustice to children? I want to illustrate this with a story, okay? And the story that I'm about to tell, I'm sure everyone in this room could tell their own story of this sort. This is about a little girl whom I will call Gina. I encountered her when I was a foster parent. One encounters many children in foster care, not just your own kids. You meet your siblings, other siblings, and you meet co-foster parents, and you bump into a lot of foster kids when you're involved in the system in some way. And so this is a little girl that my husband and I encountered when we were doing foster care. This little girl, when we met her, she was 12 years old, and she was smart and she was attractive and so on. And she was coming into foster care out of a group home. She'd been in a group home, and the social workers were trying to transition her into a home so that she could go back and live with her father and her stepmother. And that was the goal. The goal is always family reunification. Well, things were going along fine in the foster home until one day the child was asked to do something that she didn't want to do, and she said, "I'm going to call my lawyer. I can make it so you never get any more foster kids." And the foster parents are looking at each other and saying, "You know what? We're going to call the social worker, and we're getting you out of here. We're going to invoke our right to have a child removed from the home," because you have that right? Because if this is a child who will talk to you like this is a child who can get you into all kinds of trouble, right? There was a teenage boy in the household. What if she had made a false accusation against the teenage boy or against the husband? So that's what happened. The child was removed from the home. Now let me tell you the story behind Gina's situation. What happened to her? What happened to her, just going back to the very beginning, her mother and father were not married to one another. She was conceived without marriage. Her mother developed a drug problem. I'm not sure at what point along the way her mother developed a drug problem. The father took care of the child, took good care of her, took full responsibility for her. The mother kind of disappeared. Along the way, the father met another woman, fell in love with her, and married her. And together they had another child. They had a new baby. And when the new baby came, Gina was jealous of the new wife. Gina was jealous of the new baby. Gina was trying to hurt the new baby. The parents were scared to leave her alone unattended. They were scared of what she might do. And on one occasion, she and her stepmother had a quarrel. Yet one never knows exactly what happens, but it sounds like Gina provoked the quarrel and the stepmother did a little push. And at that point, Gina called the police, and her stepmother was taken to jail. And Gina was put into foster care. That is the incident that led to Gina being put into foster care, okay? So what do we have here now? We have a little girl who was deeply wounded from the outset, a deeply disturbed little girl here, trying to be loved, and yet she's inoculated against the love people are trying to give her. It's like a vaccine. It's like she's shunning. She can't receive. She can't receive the love that people are trying to give her. She's been empowered by the fact that she got an adult arrested, and that kind of power goes to a child's head, right? And that's not a constructive thing for a child to feel like that, right? And so this is a little girl now who really can't live in a family. She really can't even live in a family under those circumstances. In the meantime, her mom's parents came into the scene and wanted to take custody of her and wanted to have her come live with them. And I want you to picture this girl's these grandparents, right? Their own daughter's gone off the rails. They're heartbroken over the daughter. They're heartbroken over the little girl who's now in foster care. They want to do something. But the father doesn't want the little girl to go off to another state where he can't see her anymore, right? So what do we have? We have a situation that is quite literally impossible. It's impossible to do justice to every person in this situation. It's literally impossible. I call this a structural injustice to the child. And what do I mean by that? It is justice for the child to be cared for by their own mother and father wherever possible, married to one another in a permanent covenant of love, right? That's justice to the child. And if the child doesn't have that, there needs to be a darn good reason, right? There needs to be a reason. Right? Sometimes there are reasons. People die, they become mentally ill, they become incapacitated. Reasons happen, but there needs to be a good reason. If you do it without a reason, that is a structural injustice to the child. Now, along with that structural injustice, that's kind of a conceptual thing, I want to point out to you that children who are not raised with their own mother and father are at risk for certain kinds of things. And one of the most important we have to talk about is child abuse. The single most dangerous person to a child is their mother's unmarried boyfriend. The boyfriend problem is considered the biggest problem. Social workers will tell you that. Police will tell you that. I bet Dr. Ross knows some stories about that, right? The unrelated boyfriend. So there's a study almost 10 years ago of child deaths in Missouri, and children residing in households with unrelated adults were nearly 50 times as likely to die of inflicted injuries than children residing with their two biological parents. 50 times as likely. And inflicted injuries, I'm not talking about kid falling down the stairs or dying of pneumonia or something. I'm talking about kids being beat up, okay? Inflicted injuries, 50 times more likely. So that unrelated adult is a serious problem. And children in households with a single parent and no other adults in residence had no increased risk of inflicted injury deaths. So in other words, sometimes we hear people say single moms are a problem. Single moms who stay single are not a problem particularly, right? If they stay single, it's not that big of a problem. It's the new love interest that becomes problematic, and that has to be addressed somehow. So in households with unrelated adults, most of the perpetrators of these injuries, 84% of them, were the unrelated adult household members, and 6.5% of perpetrators were a biological parent. Only 6.5% of perpetrators were a biological parent. So that's telling you something about the risk that children have associated with this situation. Now let's talk briefly about the taxpayer costs to the decline in marriage. I know we have a few political people here, we have a few finance people here. Let's just get real crass and talk about money, okay? Forget all this warm, fuzzy, touchy-feely Jesus stuff. Let's just talk about money, because a lot of our brothers and sisters only understand about the money. So, money. It is very expensive to the taxpayer to have families breaking apart. All right? And according to one study in 2008, if you looked at the taxpayer cost alone, the health, education, mental illness, crime, all of these things, the increased cost to the taxpayer was $112 billion per year. Billion with a B, $112 billion per year, which is the GDP of New Zealand at that time. So this is not chump change that we're talking about. And of course, this doesn't include the private costs to the family, and the human cost of heartbreak doesn't include any of that. So the last point that I want to make to you before I have to sit down is something that we have not yet spoken of directly, and that is we must address the underlying sexual culture if we're going to revive marriage. We have to talk about the connection between sex, babies, and marriage. Now, one time, I was doing a debate at a college campus, and I made the statement that I thought was kind of an unexceptional statement. I said, sex makes babies. And the person I was debating said, no, it doesn't. Oh, says I, what do you mean it doesn't? And she said, unprotected sex makes babies. Oh, well, okay, so this is how we're thinking. We're entitled to unlimited sexual activity as long as we think we're using protection, but we're not really making the connection between the sex and the babies, okay? And that's the way the modern culture works. So if we look at that underlying sexual culture, we realize that people are not using contraception consistently or correctly, and so therefore, it's ridiculous to act as if you have perfectly functioning contraception. So according to a British study from an abortion provider, 2/3 of the women who came in for an abortion said they were using contraception when they got pregnant. Okay, 2/3 of them. According to another study, if you ask people, what percentage of women are using contraception every single time? The answer is, of college-educated women, just over half are using contraception every single time. If you look at people with a high school education or less than 20% are using it every single time. But they're being told by the culture they can have as much sex as they want because they've got a pill in their purse or something, or a condom in their pocket or something. Somehow we have taken in this idea that sexual activity is a recreational activity with no particular connection to babies, even though it is totally irrational to believe that. We've got to deal with that, I would say. So that's why I think we must address the sexual culture as a part of creating the culture of marriage. That's just got to be a part of the equation. And that's one of the things that the Ruth Institute is dedicating to doing. And I have some information about signing up to be part of the Ruth Institute if any of you are interested in doing that. Thank you very much.